What's up, guys? Hello, so Footballtalk here. Jumping over to the AFC side of things for the first time, as we're now diving into divisional draft and roster reviews, where over the course of a month, we're alternating between the two conferences, working our way around the compass basically, as we're highlighting all 32 franchises and their approach to the offseason with a draft-focused method. Again, this will be more of a podcast version, where I quickly run through each selection of the 4 teams in each video, give a quick scouting report on those players and a fit within those rosters, projecting what their role might be, along with my overarching thoughts on the class and the meaning in relation to what each team had already done early in the offseason. Plus, at the end of each episode, although I don't love the concept of draft grades, I do think it's fair to compare the method each franchise took in the draft and the prospects they collectively were able to acquire. Just for context, while I evaluated over 370 prospects this year, there are a few that slipped through the cracks, or teams just surprised us by selecting them, meaning there are usually 2 to 3 names per video that I didn't end up watching, or maybe just quickly looked into, and therefore will keep my thoughts brief. I want to get started quickly here. Just one more thing: if you like what I'm spitting out there, please let me know by hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing to the channel. Follow along with the series and everything else I post here and on my site helloswithfootballtalk.com. That link and timestamps for each team are down below in the description. AFC North now, first up with the Baltimore Ravens, who in the first round 27th overall selected Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia, second round 59th overall Mike Green, edge defender out of Marshall, third round 91st overall Emory Jones Jr., offensive tackle / interior lineman LSU, fourth round 129th overall Teddy Buchanan, linebacker California, 5th round 141st overall Carson Winston, offensive tackle Alabama A&M, then 5 6th rounders, 178th overall Baal Cohn, cornerback Western Michigan, 186th Tyler Loop, kicker Arizona, 203rd LaJohntay Wester, wide receiver Colorado, 210th Aeneas Peoples, interior D lineman Virginia Tech, and 212th overall Robert Longerbeam, the cornerback from Rutgers, and then finally in the 7th round 233rd overall Garrett Dellinger, interior offensive lineman LSU. 11 total selections, and they started off hot with Malachi Starks from Georgia, a top 10 prospect overall in the class for me. Maybe not super flashy, but incredibly sound player in the secondary who can contribute right away. Works up the alley with a good balance between urgency and control, regularly creating stops for limited yardage, sees well for the convoy and plays to the perimeter, and does a great job coming to balance as a tackler. Brings a tremendous combination of football IQ, instincts and ball skills for the position, which is why he fulfilled a variety of roles for the Bulldogs defense, since he was a true freshman starter for Kirby Smart in a complex system. And if you ask him to drop down into the slot, he can impede the progress of receivers, umber them without drawing flags, rarely overruns the break, and competes like hell to catch points. He does have room to tidy up his angles and run support a little bit, and for an extensive box roll, he doesn't quite have the frame to stack and jet regularly, and most of Starks' missed tackles came when getting crossed up in space, as he puts himself in good positions to cut off the angle for guys after the catch, but gets caught flat-footed instead of driving through the target. Still, this was probably my favorite pick of the first round, because the Ravens needed to add to the safety room, and Starks will be a great connector for that secondary. Baltimore's defense overall turned it around over the second half of last season, and the Zach Ward taking over as DC, in large part thanks to benching a couple of veteran safeties, while moving Kyle Hamilton back deep more, and inserting a Darius Washington. The latter not tragically tore his Achilles earlier this week, because otherwise I'd written down that this now gives them the freedom to run a big nickel again, allow Hamilton to roam around the line of scrimmage, and effect plays on a more consistent basis, while being interchangeable in the back end with those roles, which now means they might need an undrafted free agent highlighted in the piece last week to step up now. You can read up on that over at my site. But then second round with Mike Green, this was a lot more controversial because Green was largely projected to go in the first round, but a couple of sexual assault accusations early in his collegiate career took him off the ball for some teams, which you can certainly argue that the Ravens, having done the work to feel comfortable about picking him here, feels pretty vague. What can't be questions, and I'll focus on here, is that this is a big-time football player who I had right behind Starks inside my personal top 10. Creates plenty of knockback on contact with tight ends in the run game, but he's also too fast to just leave unblocked on the backside, and slip with the way he can backdoor blocks and zone concepts, or crash across the face of linemen. There's different ways to win as a pass rusher, whether it's bending the corner after defeating the outside line of tackles, transitioning to a quick inside move after they overset on him, and then he can play mind games off that with those in and out maneuvers. But he can just bury those hands into the chest of those guys as well and condense the pocket, as we saw when he put Oregon first round tackle Josh Connolly Jr. on his ass when he caught him out of position during Senior Bowl week. Green needs to do a better job of attacking half the man run defense and staying in control of reps, often not taking good enough care of his contained responsibilities, and he's not quite yet proficient with using his hands as weapons to keep his frame clean rushing the passer if he can't get under blockers or takes a strike first. But this was my edge 2 behind only third overall pick Abdul Carter, and if he stays clean off the field, this could end up being a massive steal towards the end of round 2. You've got Calvin Norton for one more year, Odafe has definitely shown some growth, but Green should be a major piece of the rotation right away, and has a chance to finally be the double-digit sack player that they haven't had since Terrell Suggs. Emory Jones from LSU is just such a Ravens pick as a 2-year starter at right tackle for the Tigers, but will most likely transition inside, at least early on at the next level. A maul on gap and man schemes with great thickness throughout his frame, able to create significant horizontal or vertical displacement. Yet I thought his short area agility and how he can get on the second level stood out on multiple occasions as well, with over 34-inch arms to steer opponents off track, packs a hefty punch with the outside hand into the sternum of pass rushers that stuns them, active to refit, and when those mitts are connected, he's typically not letting guys go anymore. Overall, his hand placement and footwork need refinement and marriage of the two in order to unlock the raw force he brings to get in the ground game, while as a pass protector, he tends to bend at the waist and duck his head into contact too much, leading to moments of imbalance, while at tackle, his feet operate in too much of an independent fashion. There'll be a learning period switching to guard and probably to switch sides as well, but I can very much see Jones beat out Andrew Voorhees for the left guard spot right away. He can kick back out to right tackle on the pinch if Roger Rosengarten gets banged up, but having those bumpers either side of him and being allowed to be more aggressive in his approach will be beneficial for him long term, I believe. I'll be a little quicker with these 8-day free guys. First with Teddy Buchanan from Cal, 6'2", 235 pounds, looks like a Greek god chiseled into stone, but also has 4.6 speed at linebacker, offers a quick burst to cut off angles to the corner and perimeter oriented plays, and highly adept at using his hands to keep his frame clean in order to not lose track of the football. Comfortable opening and running with slot receivers down the pole, but also pick up running backs one-on-one out of the backfield, while being fast and elusive as a blitzer who locates and gets through wide rush lanes. Doesn't take advantage of opportunities to meet blockers early or create traffic in the offensive backfield, where it's generally too tall into contact, and he can get a little overzealous, closing in on receivers catching the ball in his vicinity and allowing them to slip underneath him. So a really fun, explosive player on the second level who'll get his chance to compete for that starting spot alongside Roquan Swift, who is slowly starting to age, and you can use some dynamism next to him, but Buchanan will have to become more violent into contact. Then Carson Vincent from Alabama A&M is a 6'7", 315-pound developmental tackle with a wingspan of just over 7 feet, leads up into contact with his hands and uses a wide frame to shield defenders in the run game, very measured in his climps to the second level, and is consistently able to wall off bodies there, and features a rapid first kick to choke off the angles of edge rushers, plus has some impressive moments of gliding laterally to mirror inside counters, but still pretty raw at this point, in particular when it comes to centering his blocks, rolling his hips, starting with better leverage, and then not yet having NFL play strength to create movement. And he pries his shoulders open way early and lacks technique beyond his first kick to actually take vertical pass sets, while needing to do a better job protecting his inside back. This was right in line with our valued Vincent as a high upside investment who has the potential to eventually make Ronnie Stanley expendable on the blind side with his injury history, and how it was somewhat unclear if they prioritized bringing him back. Bilal Cohn from Western Michigan is another guy with great upside as a tall boundary corner with light feet and great confidence, low in his stance and as he mirror matches releases, where he's patient and smooth in his transitions, plays the eyes of wideouts to look back himself and locate the ball when he's in the hip pocket down the field, while choosing great angles to maximize his length and challenge the catch points on nearby targets and zone assignments, redirects forward out of his pedal in a hurry on runs and screens out to the perimeter, and puts his body in the way of ball carriers with a head of steam, even if he knows that he'll take the worst of the collision. Lined up in soft press quite a bit, but didn't actually show that he can jam receivers in a disruptive way and pair up his footwork with it, while in off coverage there will be a false step added in too often, and has room to improve his technique taking on blocks and actually utilizing his length. Nate Wiggins can play up close, but he's always been at his best playing off, clicking and closing on match assignments. Nakon and last year's 4th rounder TJ Tampa have time to impress the coaching staff, for whom he also will replace Marlon Humphrey in the boundary, since I anticipate the Stark selection to indicate a heavier rate of free safety sets, but a veteran isn't used as much in the slot. Tyler Loop, the Arizona kicker. If you know me, I don't love taking any specialists in the draft because the hit rate is so incredibly low, and the chance that you land on one of the couple of guys you invite to minicamp is typically higher, but I understand there was more urgency in the situation with the recently released Justin Tucker and the legal situation he's currently facing, which I won't comment any further on here without more information. But for Loop, 126 of 128 for his career in extra points, over 78% in field goals each of the past 4 years for Arizona, and just under an 84% career average. Also punted as a true freshman, generally expected to go undrafted with a few names right there in his range who didn't end up getting picked. But I'm not going to act like I value that kickers can really speak on him. LaJohntay Wester, the Colorado wide receiver, sudden off the line with quick acceleration to put defenders in catch-up mode after allowing through releases, and can threaten safeties on slot fades or posts. Approaches passes with soft hands and sound technique, and blurs out his quarterback by securing some low throws. Watching his juice after the catch, a couple of times I mistook Wester for second overall pick Travis Hunter, quickly being able to turn routine plays into explosives. He has outlier size with a minimal catch radius due to sub 30-inch arms, and more of a herky-jerker move I'd call him, and simply needs to start tucking the ball away right after he secures it, especially with some of the shots that he takes, as he fumbled 5 times in his career. If the Ravens carry 6 receivers and designate West as a punt returner, he'll deliver some value as long as he holds onto the ball, and probably receives a handful of designated touches on offense. And E.S. Peebles from Virginia Tech is someone I was a huge fan of as my number 10 interior D lineman in a loaded class. Generally plays low and is able to wreak havoc as a penetration style player, ripping through one shoulder of offensive linemen, has big time juice exploding off the ball, and if he catches the guard with the cleats in the turf, he can knock away the punch and go right around him in passing situations. And he features a shockingly sudden outside spin move when initially lined up in the A-gap, but knows the other one next to him is free, that leaves guys behind in the dust. He has sub 32-inch arms, and you don't see him play with vision through blocks a whole lot, limiting his fits to a gap attacking style front largely, and his bull rush can kind of run out of steam after getting the initial vertical displacement. So I was definitely a little higher on the undersized Peebles at 6'2", 280 pounds, but even if he just is a designated interior pass rusher, I think he'll earn those opportunities and put heat on quarterbacks and some longer downs alongside Nnamdi Madubuike, which this late in the 6th round is really all you're asking for. For Robert Longerbeam, the corner out of Rutgers, another guy who's definitely undersized at 5'11", 170 pounds, but super feisty and a super athlete, hitting 11-2 in the broad jump and cracking 4-4 in the 40. Does well to ID releases, get hands on receivers, and being physical with stacking over the top routes and not allowing himself to get nudged off easily. Shows good feel for his landmarks in zone coverage, and throwing a hitch or curl late to his side becomes a dangerous proposition with his closing burst, and he doesn't mind sticking his nose in the fan and plays out to the corner, along with bringing big time effort. He doesn't pack a whole lot of mass or play strength to punch with blocks and involve himself against the run while leaving his feet too much as a tackler, and he'll need to adjust his uber aggressive coverage style in order to avoid getting penalized. So a really fun watch, and will fight his ass off to make that roster, but size will ultimately be somewhat of a limiting factor with a now fairly crowded room. And finally, Garrett Delling from LSU, a burly guard with a hefty playing style at 6'4", 325 pounds. Whether it's taking over the down lineman or climbing off combos, Delling is able to twist bodies out of the lane and create tracks for the runner, continues to battle for inside position with his hands, and punishes pass rushers when they expose their ribs to him, including on some twist action, but lacks the shorter agility to regularly be trusted with reach block and free techniques, such as on outside zone, and looks rather labored as a puller, while his lateral movement skills look a little sluggish, and he's going to struggle against twitchy interior rushers who can really challenge the edges of his frame. So I looked at him as a fringe roster candidate if whoever would select him late, and it'll be an uphill battle in Baltimore, but someone who can be elevated and trusted to at least not look overwhelmed in case they do need to call his number. Overall, another outstanding class by Eric DeCosta and company, who have been one of the strongest drafting teams over the last decade and beyond, now handed over by Ozzie Newsome, who still plays an entry-level role for the front office. How they treat players with off-field concerns despite saying they have a zero-tolerance policy is a different story and worthy of being brought up, but in terms of quality of talents that they acquired here, there's not much to critique. They got 2 of my top 10 players in the class at the end of the 1st and 2nd round respectively. They rebuilt depth on the O-line and a corner. Buchanan at least has the potential to become a starting linebacker eventually. Wester may be a starting punt returner, and I absolutely adore Peebles as a cutoff but disruptive force on the interior of the defense, who could way outperform his draft capital, primarily in passing downs. The kick in the 6th round is the only pick I didn't love, but they knew they had to find a solution, and if he ends up being an upgrade over Tucker on the field, who clearly fell off last year before he was ultimately released for football reasons as they said, although Will clearly understands that the accusations he's facing might mean the end of his NFL career, nobody will question it then. Baltimore have become kings at figuring out the compact formula, even if we could argue that they didn't need to make 11 selections to this current roster, but great work, other than maybe how they approached the podium following the green selection. Next, the Cincinnati Bengals, who in the 1st round, 17th overall, selected Shamar Stewart, the edge defender out of Texas A&M, 2nd round 49th overall Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker South Carolina, 3rd round 81st overall Dylan Fairchild, interior offensive lineman Georgia, 4th round 119th overall Barry Carter, linebacker Clemson, 5th round 153rd overall Jalen Rivers, offensive tackle / interior lineman Miami, and in the 6th round 193rd overall Tosh Brooks, running back Texas Tech. For Shamar Stewart out of A&M at the top here, an absolute freak athlete who at 6'6", 267 pounds at the combine, ended up with a perfect RAS thanks to 4.59 in the 40, a 40-inch vertical, and just an inch short of an 11-foot broad jump. He packs a ton of natural strength and insane twitch for a man of his dimensions, capable of owning space in the run game or knifing through gaps. His burst off the ball for probably playing close to 300 pounds, and his ability to dissociate his upper and low half to dip around blockers really popped off the screen, and his combination of quickness and length make him a nightmare for guards as a sub-package rusher. He does play fairly recklessly at this point, charging into opponents, not always having a plan of how to counter the play, along with missing too many tackles. And he has a puzzling lack of sack production, as someone who doesn't rush with a comprehensive plan, and isn't known as a finisher quite yet either. I thought this was right where Stewart should have come off the board, and in a league which Javon Walker was drafted 1st overall just a couple of years ago, I thought it was weird how much this guy was being questioned, because even though he doesn't have the numbers to back it up, as someone who lined up as a 4-eye or 5 technique a bunch, you could feel his disruption. Since he will need to figure out the Trey Hendrickson contract situation, but plugging a freakish dude like this alongside him and giving him some time to develop his rush package could reap major benefits down the road. Demetrius Knight from South Carolina brings old school size for a middle linebacker at 6'1", 245 pounds with a downhill thumping mindset in the run game. He brings knockback power against climbing linemen, but also glides along with lateral action with relative ease, pretty light on his feet and covers good depth in zone drops, with the hitting power to dislodge receivers from the ball. His closing burst, combined with the hitting power, makes this guy a scary sight for quarterbacks blitzing through open gaps and being able to plow through running backs trying to slide in front of him. Knight is a tick late to decipher the action and click after shuffling along with some kind of eye candy, and all more focused on charging into bodies rather than actually staying in phase with the play. And at this point, definitely more of a spot dropper rather than someone who commands space and clouds passing windows by floating towards targets to discourage quarterbacks. This was definitely early for me, as I had Knight right in the fringe of my top 100. Obviously, I was low on him compared to consensus as my linebacker 9, and I understand the urgency in a weak linebacker class, especially with Jermaine Pratt having requested a trade, but this is such a tough position to project to the next level, and I don't quite see how you can have that level of confidence in the player considering who else was available in that range. As for Dylan Fairchild from Georgia, a former top 50 national recruit, and truly played like a jerk in the middle of that Bulldogs line. His weight room brilliance as a former part of the Bruce Feldman Freaks list shows up on the field with the way he can play low and right defenders off the linebacks in the run game, charges into awaiting edge defenders with brute force on kick-up pulls, and releases extremely well in the screen game. And as a pass protector, he uses his hands as weapons. His helmet looks like a garden sprinkler when occupied initially, and he hands out some nasty rip shots onto nearby rushers. You see twitchy interior defenders make Fairchild whiff pretty badly when backdoor in zone blocks, and all isn't the most light-footed athlete trying to secure targets in space, while in the passing game he needs to maximize his length and not allow interior defenders to gain access to his chest first. So there are clearly things he still needs to work out and tap into the potential he shows in both phases of the game. I love his bullet mentality and high-end moments on tape, but he needs to become more consistent overall in his technique before I feel comfortable having him out there as a full-time starter. He's probably an immediate upgrade over Cordell Wilson at left guard, but this was definitely a good round early for me. For Barry Carter, the linebacker at Clemson, who actually had slightly higher than the linebacker selected 70 spots earlier, someone who's been on the radar of NFL scouts for several years by now, great athlete but never quite showed the mental progress to live up to his potential. This is a twitched up explosive player who arrives in the backfield in the blink of an eye if you give him the lane, and he can be that run and chase specialist. Played a lot of overhang on big nickel basically, and looked very comfortable out there in space, but also has the wheels to hang with slot receivers up the seam. And his closing burst as a blitzer is pretty insane, where he can rush off the edge and bend the corner, operate as a spy, or use blockers as a launch pad to bat down passes at the line. Carter is still a bit more of a C-ball, gap ball type of play at this stage, even if he has continued to show progress, with a tendency to overrun plays, and he definitely leaves his feet too much as a tackler, while having had his worst season coverage statistically as a senior. So he clearly needs to be put with someone on the second level who can kind of get him on track, allow the talent to shine, where he takes stuff off his plate mentally. Next to Logan Wilson, he makes some sense, as they bring along light, where they use him in certain packages at least, due to what he can deliver on passing downs. Next, Jalen Rivers from Miami, a former 4-star recruit at tackle, who primarily landed up on the edge early on, but last year he played 20 plus snaps in all but one start at both left tackle and left guard. He has the dense frame of a guard but plus length for even tackle, with 35-inch arms, operating with a wide base and bringing his hip for contact in the run game, has the grip and upper body strength to torque the lineman after laying late into reps quite frequently, and he's quick out of his stance and to land his paws to dictate reps in pass protection, while his long limbs are a definite help transitioning on twists. But he excessively loads up his strike in the run game, and well-skilled defensive linemen will be able to punish him for it, and he overcommits to the upfield rush with how he shifts his weight onto the outside foot and makes himself susceptible to crossface counters. Rivers had a really promising start to Senior Bowl week, but some of the bad habits started showing up as things progressed. With how the Bengals want to get the ball out quickly, having a guy with his build and length could allow them to use him some at tackle, but he didn't really have anyone behind the two massive starters. Last but not least, Tash Brooks from Texas Tech, who's built like a bowling ball at 5'10", 220 pounds. For a big back, Brooks' patience and ability to slow his feet behind the line of scrimmage stand out, where he runs the ball with good rhythm and wiggle, has more make-you-miss ability than you might expect, and is tough to slow down when he gets the momentum going downhill. He has reliable hands as a receiver, and some of the better pass pro tape, erasing space, but then coming to balance and picking up linebackers with the low center of gravity. But he's a somewhat stiff runner with short strides that lack great dynamism or long speed, and more of a check-down option than anything like a matchup player who can take linebackers vertically as a receiver. Brooks has some heavy tracks as the engine of the Red Raider offense over the last couple of years, but someone I like quite a bit as an RB3 in Cincinnati right away, and I believe might make Zach Moss expendable a year from now. So a look at this class as a whole, I like the names for the most part, but definitely also have some questions. Stewart at the top maybe isn't the refined pass rush specialist that Cincinnati could use right away to go along with Hendrickson, whose contract they still have to figure out, and a secondary that's still coming together. They only made 6 picks total, yet they doubled down on 2 positions with linebacker and interior O-line, which are definite areas of need, especially if they trade away Jermaine Pratt here at some point. But for as bad as the starting interior line was last year, they didn't add anyone of note other than TJ Slate in this offseason, who is nothing more really than a space eater in the middle. For how the roster is constructed and the financial decisions they've made to keep the offensive core of Burrow, those 2 star receivers, and even Mike Gesicki together, you kind of need defenders that can contribute right away, and I'm not sure I would describe the guys they selected here as such. Could this end up looking great in a couple of years if all of them hit the ceiling? Sure, but that's not really how the game is played, I'd argue. Which brings us to the Cleveland Browns, who in the first round 5th overall selected Mason Graham, interior lineman Michigan, 2 second-rounders, 33rd overall Carson Schwessinger, linebacker UCLA, and 36th overall Quinshon Judkins, running back Ohio State. Then 2 third-rounders, 67th overall Heron Fannin Jr., tight end Bowling Green, and 94th overall Dylan Gabriel, quarterback Oregon. Then in the 4th round, 126th overall Dylan Sampson, running back Tennessee, and in the 5th round, the pick that was discussed the most of the entire weekend probably, 144th overall Shadur Sanders, quarterback Colorado. Obviously they were involved in a massive trade, down 3 spots from 2 to Jacksonville's original selection, along sending picks 104 and 200 to the Jags for 36, 126, and a first rounder next year. And with that 5th overall pick, they went with the guy Myles Garrett supposedly handpicked in Mason Graham from Michigan. Incredibly skilled, athletic big man with a wrestling background and one of the better 2-year stretches you're going to find at the position, has the proficient and sudden hands to deconstruct blocks and the body control to counter pressure being applied on him in the run game. Yet if you ask him to penetrate, he'll blow right through the shoulder of a guard or back to those guys when they overset on him as a free technique. He rushes the passer with a lot of shake to him and creates favorable angles for himself that way, along with being able to pull cloth and access secondary counters in order to get home. He only has 32-inch arms, and you do see him get ridden down horizontally a few times when caught on an angle, and I'd like to see a little more aggression from him rushing the passer, rather than always trying to set up blockers with his quickness. So he doesn't pack a devastating bull rush or physically overwhelms blockers on the interior necessarily, but he's so tough to stay engaged against and finds ways to the football, affect the quarterback, and make your O-line work like hell. To put him next to Myles now in that aggressive 4-down front under Jim Schwartz, what they can do with the twist game on longer downs, having also added Malik Collins this offseason, and the competition at the other end spot, this front could really kick some ass again. For Schwessinger, the UCLA linebacker, a former walk-on with the Bruins in 2021, who really broke out last season with an FBS high 90 solo tackles and being named first team All-American, when this guy sees it and trusts his eyes, he gets there in a hurry, man. Easy lateral mover to track the running back's movement and zone concepts, but they can also fall back a gap or win the dance behind double teams against the runner or beat him out to the corner. active communicator in zone coverage, who recognizes when he needs to cut off crossers or close down on guys hooking up in front of him, but also shows the quick burst to make up leverage advantages by tight ends, or even run with slot receivers down the pipe at times. You do see him take a couple of false steps fairly regularly because he gets locked in on the action in the backfield or bites on some eye candy, and as effective as he was as the sudden blitzer who can slip through creases, being a little light in the pants does show up when offensive linemen snatch him up or he tries to take on lead blockers in the hole. Very much a modern day linebacker who I believe will certainly benefit from the chaos this D-line can create, and he's the one cleaning things up behind it. It looks like Cleveland will keep Jordan Hicks around for the latter year of his 1+1 deal that he signed this past offseason, and this selection unfortunately is probably an indication about the organization's trust that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah will be ready anytime soon, coming off the scary neck injury that he suffered back in week 8, for which they've already placed him on the PUP list and basically ruled him out for all of 2025. Not a lot of guys who fit that role a whole lot better though than this rookie. Now moving on to Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, my RB3 and almost a tie with his teammate Travion Henderson, but Judkins is the bruiser between those two, and I thought it was a perfect fit for the heir apparent to Nick Chubb's long reign in Cleveland. A 6 foot, 220 pound pack of violence who runs the ball with a great combination of explosiveness, agility and power. Former of a power back, Judkins' wiggle to flat out make defenders miss around the line of scrimmage pop to me. He runs with great balance and is able to shrug off arm tackles like they're just turnstiles. He's more of a body catcher, but he cures those targets pretty reliably, and he packs the mass plus the mindset to embrace car crash collisions with second level blitzers. Not the most intricate or conceptually advanced runner who uses different pacing or footwork to his advantage, while stop his feet at times trying to navigate around penetration, and he doesn't offer great creativity in the open field and has room for improvement in the placement and general utilization of stiff arms, which really stood out to me this past season. That's something where I'm interested in seeing if he can tap into what he showed in space at times, or his 2 at all miss, how quickly things can click for him. Do we see Kevin Stefanski go back to his roots with more of a wide zone scheme focused approach, or how quickly we trust the rookie to make more advanced decisions? As they go back to a heavy emphasis on beating up opponents on the ground and winning through the defense, great compliment with more of a home run hit than Jerome Ford, and now also Dylan Sampson from Tennessee who they picked in the 4th round, and I quickly want to jump ahead to here. He's the one who actually already understands pacing pretty well on gap schemes with pulling linemen for a young runner, shows impressive start-stop quickness when to suddenly maneuver around bodies at the line of scrimmage, but also make them miss with more dramatic moves in the open field, has soft hands, natural adjust to off-target throws, fully turns up the field, and I thought his eyes and feet were pretty well connected to find and take care of assignments when locked in protection. Tiptoed around and tried to bounce things out wide too much when Tennessee actually didn't face super light boxes. Too often gets dragged or twisted down by defenders around the line of scrimmage, who were only just able to grab a hold of him, and his usage as a receiver was also limited to swing routes and hooks pretty much, so neither one of these guys will take away some of the downfield opportunities we saw for 40 times out of the backfield, but this now is a fun trio in Cleveland, who collectively form a pretty complete group, and Sampson brings you the most make and miss ability among those. Now back to the pair of 3rd rounders, first with Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, a truly unique prospect, who did play nearly 40% of snaps in line, but last year was used in all kinds of ways, and ended up leading all FBS players in catches 117 and receiving yards 1,555. He works up through contact in order to pin the endman on plays out to the perimeter, and can cover up bodies as a fullback leading up through the hole. Has that duck-footed running style, but can stretch the seam or run away from linebackers and crossers, along with throwing in some head fakes, and just being this unorthodox mover to keep defenders off balance. Just swallows the ball with those large mitts, and then with how tough it makes it for linebackers to square him up, paired with his strength to drag guys along, he was able to create a bunch of chunk plays. Not the most natural bender to take charge of and drive his legs for contact, and his biggest issues as a blocker show up coming to balance at the 2nd level, while as a receiver, there's definitely some stiffness when you ask him to run more refined routes, where he's not exploding out of his cuts or whipping his hips around as you'd like to see him to separate. He's definitely not the easiest projection, or I ever look at him as this no-doubt talent 1 who can do everything you would ask of that position, but now him and David Njoku are just nightmares to cover, and if defenses put out heavier personnel sets when both of them are on the field, they can quickly punish those guys. And then the 2 quarterbacks, at the end of day 2 actually, with Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, a short distributor with a quick trigger, but also in playmaking skills and better arm talent than he's given credit for. Brings that rapid release and consistently delivers a tight spiral to make him a savant on RPOs with his slick ball handling, yet he counterbalances that with some beautiful vertical throws. Recognizes safety rotations and has answers for them more than the majority of college quarterbacks, while using his eyes and shoulders well to move those guys. and he's a twitchy mover inside the pocket who gets himself out of trouble on the regular and has some magic to his game with flipping it all to his outlets late or being nifty as a runner. He does max out around 40 yards in sideline shots, where you see some passes die out beyond that, and some balls loop when he should be driven from the opposite hash. And he'll occasionally miss a safety buzzing down or a linebacker drifting underneath a route over the middle, and doesn't quite have the RPMs on the ball to make up for it. To me, I view Gabriel as a perfect backup, especially in an offense like Miami's behind Tua Tagovailoa, because of his quick decision making, anticipation, and some of the stuff he can add when what was drawn up on paper isn't there. But he's not part of a 4 or even 5 quarterback competition, since the Browns also brought in Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. The last trade I'll mention here as I went through the list, because this is the name that dominated the conversation for 2.5 days, as the Browns finally said this is too far and traded picks 166 and 192 to Seattle for 144 in order to select the second rookie quarterback in Shedeur, who I viewed as a day 2 prospect the whole way, as part of that second tier with a massive gap to Miami's Cam Ward, and I extensively discussed what this slide meant in my big draft recap, which you can read up on at the link in my video description. On the field, the reasons he fell: he's a below average athlete by today's NFL standards, with an average at best arm, and overestimates his talents, I would argue. Too often he's a tick late on his deep balls and pulls his targets back into contact, and not like his savvy pocket navigator, also hanging at the top of his drop and inviting the possibility for sacks. However, he does bring very clean, repeatable mechanics as a passer, and generally is pretty damn accurate. Wants to win from the pocket, and you do see a clear process pre-snap with him, where he excelled in a quick rhythm passing attack, working leverage advantages, and finding his guys in soft spots versus zone coverage. And I love his toughness, along with being kind of slippery to get himself out of trouble and extend plays. Again, all the stuff around his selection and why Shedeur made it here I discussed recently and has been such a massive topic that I'll leave it at that, but ultimately I'm sure this whole experience humbled him, and in the end there's a chance this ends up being the best thing for him, having a new perspective and no pressure on him as if he was selected up high. And if one of those guys hits, that's the biggest emergency button they can hit to get out of the nightmare that has been the Deshaun Watson situation. Traded a 5th round for Kenny Pickett this offseason, and you brought back Joe Flacco after a year off. So we'll see how things play out for them. Browns ownership probably meddling in this situation, telling Jim Andrew Barry and Kevin Stefanski to move up for Shedeur pulled this down a little bit when I was doing my quick snap draft takeaways, but in terms of the talent they acquired, this was up there for one of the best drafts in the whole league. Graham, Schlesinger, Judkins, Fannin and Sampson were all right there, almost eerily so for me in terms of where I valued them on my big board. Gabriel maybe a couple rounds early, but if they had taken Sanders with one of the 2 second rounders, that would have not been egregious at all to me. So in my mind, you can swap those two, and now both come at pretty good value, while they find instant stars at D-tackle, linebacker and running back. Plus of course the big piece here is, if this was just it, that's a really solid class. But you can't forget that they now own that extra 1st rounder from Jacksonville next year, which we absolutely have to factor in. If you add that in, now all of a sudden this looks like a masterclass by Barry & Company, who hopefully are now allowed to run things in their vision again, and there won't be too many distractions by one of the new quarterbacks that they brought in. And the final team for today, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who in the 1st round, 21st overall, brought in Derek Harmon, interior defensive lineman out of Oregon, 3rd round, 83rd overall, Caleb Johnson, running back Iowa, 4th round, 123rd overall, Jack Sawyer, edge defender Ohio State, 5th round, 164th overall, Y.A. Black, interior defensive lineman Iowa, 6th round, 185th overall, Will Howard, quarterback Ohio State, and then 2 7th rounders, 226th and 229th overall, Carson Bruner, linebacker Washington, and Dante Kent, cornerback Central Michigan. First up with Derek Harmon, one of my favorite players in the entire draft, with an interesting journey as more of a stout nose tackle for Michigan State a year ago, shed about 20 pounds, and turned himself into one of the most disruptive interior guys in the country with the Ducks in 2024. Does a great job of getting his hands inside, creating leverage points, and owning his space in the run game, along with having enough twitch to play peek and shed. Shows the ability to take advantage of lunging blockers, arm over them, and wrap up the bulk area, which you can also win with in passing situations. And then he's just improved his agility and how he links his upper and lower half to execute crossface moves so much, along with the strength to drive for contact and finish his rushes. While you like the increased aggressiveness up the field, Harmon armor-wearing blockers and penetrating also leads to him getting too far up the field and surrendering easy lanes to cut up behind him now occasionally, and his hand combats still need more purpose and precision rather than just throwing them at guys. But man, this guy is such a well-rounded, crafty player to immediately boost that interior for Pittsburgh. Now he gets to learn under Cam Hayward, alongside Keanu Benton, and those guys off the edges. That's a group you just don't want to go up against, because they're absolutely relentless. You may have some questions about that back end still, but they can take over games up front. The Steelers didn't own a second rounder, but in the third they took Caleb Johnson from Iowa, a wide zone specialist who excelled last season as a one-cut-and-go type of runner, has become intelligent with navigating tight creases, and can get skinny before popping out of those with the speed to challenge safeties, and naturally makes those solid shifts as rushing tracks, has improved the utilization of his off-arm to push off or swipe in pursuit, and there were a lot more broken tackles this past season, where he lowered his shoulder, taking on contact at an angle, and was able to shrug guys off. And he's an urgent pass protector with the light feet to cover plenty of ground when asked to, in order to slide in front of guys from different angles. Too often still stops his feet instead of embracing collisions in the hole and maximizing yardage he gained through contact, and he needs a bit of a runway to become effective in those interactions, while running a 4.57 at the combine was right underwhelming, to where you now question what it'll look like against NFL speed. But he's just a perfect fit for how offensive coordinator Alfred Smith wants to run the ball. I think Johnson was slightly overrated maybe in the process, but this was basically right where I valued him, and even though I'll need to see Pittsburgh create more movement up front to get the most out of him, he could have success right away, paired with a little more dynamism in Jaylen Warren. Then in the fourth, Jack Sawyer from Ohio State, which some people probably thought this was pretty late for the hero of the Buckeyes national championship run, but I would have personally actually pushed Sawyer back even a round further. Do-it-all player for the Buckeyes, bringing his heart in the run game, playing some off the ball prior to last season, dropping into coverage and rushing the passer, immediately reacts to tackles stepping away from him, and flattens hard down the line when unblocked on the backside, lifts up or pushes down the outside hand of tackles, and makes them fold over trying to stay engaged with him, regularly crashing off one edge to make the quarterback uncomfortable. But he simply lacks any one special trait or area that he pops in as an average athlete with sub 32-inch arms, doesn't consistently play with great extension and forces an edge setter in the run game and choppy with his steps in pursuit. Plus he doesn't mitigate that lack of length by consistently winning first meaningful contact, or has the bend at the top of the rush to really worry opponents in that capacity. I personally didn't view Sawyer as anything but a piece of your rotation who will have to earn the right to rush the passer by putting in dirty work, but makes a lot of sense in your head as you think about the guys that have come in big moments for the Steelers defense in the past. They go back to the Hawkeyes in the 5th round with Wyatt Black. This dude is built like a fridge at 6'5", 335 pounds, with 35-inch arms and wears size 17 shoes, stacks up blocks and controls the point of attack, with the tricep strength to create separation from blockers and wrap up the ball carrier like a bear, as well as being able to absorb double teams. And when he sells out for the bull rush and locks out his arms, he can definitely challenge the base of guards, along with pulling cloth off that occasionally to get out of stalemates. But basically the worst tester of the entire D-line at the combine, with subpar lateral range or quick reactionary skills to mirror the first steps of the O-line, and he simply isn't really going to give you anything beyond pushing the pocket and the occasional push-pull off that. So he's a down eater who can own his space and allows Benton to catch a breather, since Pittsburgh previously didn't truly have anyone to trust at the nose to some extent. There were just a few guys in that role that I would have preferred. Will Howard from Ohio State, the quarterback who helped lead the Buckeyes to the national title and had easily his best statistical season himself, offers prototype size with good thickness in his lower half, operates with a nice bounce in the pocket and easily drives the ball to either sideline, confidently steps into and rips throws breaking towards the intermediate level of the field, and isn't afraid to stare down the barrel of the gun to deliver those. And Ohio State legitimately ran him QB power because he shows the natural feel to set up blockers and has the size to turn forward for contact. Howard hasn't shown much as a progression-style quarterback in a dropback system, getting locked onto his primary read too much, and you feel the gears spinning in his head facing more complex pressure looks. And he can get a little over-aggressive, with trusting himself to fit in power throws into risky windows, along with lacking a certain level of creativity. In terms of the size profile and pure arm strength, there are some starter qualities in Howard, and I think this range was totally fair for him, but to me this just signifies that they have a deal with Aaron Rodgers in the works, because you're simply not trotting out a 6th-round rookie or Mason Rudolph again when week 1 rolls around. 2 7th-rounders, first with Carson Bruner from Washington. One of those stories where I believe a long-term Steelers scout is the father of Bruner, and he's a solid player, has a strong upper half and regularly is able to rip from one shoulder of blockers to maintain leverage on the ball, relentlessly drives his leg through contact to stop forward progress and create stops, keeps his head on a swivel as he gains depth in his zone drops, and got his hands on plenty of passes when opposing quarterbacks try to loft them over him. He can get sacked up too far and trap himself on the wrong side of blocks, and he's constricted in the space he occupies in coverage without the quick reactionary skills to make plays on the ball outside of it. I think he can beat up Malik Harrison, or maybe even Cole Holcomb, as one of the 4 linebackers they carry on game days, or at least gets called up on the practice squad if one of those gets hurt, but he has to earn any type of defensive playing time on teams. And finally, Dante Kent from Central Michigan. I think the only non-kicker today that I didn't get to on film in this episode. 5'10", 185 pounds, ran a 4.38 at his pro day, and while he hasn't intercepted any passes in any of the last 3 years, in 46 career starts, he logged 45 PBUs, so that's pretty good for a corner, showing the ability to make plays on the ball. He's a doubtful late, whose speed might be able to shine when asked to cover kicks. There was so much speculation about the Steelers at 21, potentially being a quarterback destination, but then they don't take one, and ultimately this ends up looking so much like a classic Steelers draft. They get Harmon at the top, who just feels like he may be Cam Hayward 2.0 for years from now, which I understand is an insanely high bar. They replace Najee Harris with another big back, who to me is a little bit better of a scheme fit. They add some depth to the front 7, a quarterback who probably ends up starting way more for them at some point than he should ever do on a different roster. The quarterback question overall remains the biggest one, but at this point we have to think that Rodgers is just waiting this out until it's time to really get serious. They didn't think they would find a solution this year, which I'm perfectly fine with, but nothing about this moves me personally, and now you're kind of just looking at a franchise that has been so steadily above the NFL average, but the ceiling has always been defined by the most important position and the state of the offense overall, that I understand why there's some frustration among that fan base. If history tells us anything, they'll again win 9 or 10 games, but that shouldn't be the ultimate goal. Which brings us to our AFC North draft rankings, much stronger collectively than what we saw from the NFC counterparts earlier this week, I believe. With the caveat of the Mike Green situation, and how without the character concerns, there's no ways available at the end of the second round, I will put Baltimore top, made 11 picks, and outside of selecting a kick in the 6th round, every single one of those will either add, or to some degree significantly above value for me. Starks and Green purely based on tape were 2 of my top 10 overall prospects, and have probable potential for a team that needed help at those 2 positions defensively. They may get an upgrade at one of the guard spots with tackle flexibility, overall massively boosted the depth on the O-line and at corner, just a phenomenal class where they didn't waste any of the capital at their disposal. Next I'm putting Cleveland, another one where the fact that Shedeur Sanders never should have been available and ownership may have stepped in to overrule some of the other decision makers in the building. I can't give them that much credit for making the selection, but I think they found quality stars at 3 different positions, and although the quarterback room looks pretty crowded now, I think this new approach to throwing darts at the position isn't bad, especially in comparison to the previous plan. Plus of course that extra first rounder next year will be huge, in particular if they don't have a solution by then. Steelers come in 3rd for me, nothing glaring that I had any problems with, just not super inspiring either. Clearly wanted to become tougher on the defensive front after they had some uncommon problems defending the run last season. They don't go QB early, and that's a situation we'll keep tracking, but if Harmon lives up to my lofty expectations, and Caleb Johnson is an upgrade over Najee as a better schematic fit, they'll quickly reap the benefits here, along with taking a shot late at Will Howard, count off a phenomenal playoff run to give us some hope about where he may be headed. And Cincinnati, unfortunately at the bottom, didn't hate any of the individual selections necessarily, although I did think both of the 2 selections were about around early personally, but collectively I just don't know if this was the right path for them. I understand that the big cap hits for the offensive core will really come in a couple of years, but if some of the gambles even work out by then, you may have missed the window where this defense simply wasn't good enough, while Burrow and company were putting up massive numbers. Just didn't love the strategy overall for a team that needed impact pieces now. But that wraps up the AFC North draft and roster review. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the analysis, please hit 2 buttons for me, the thumbs up and the subscribe. Everything free of course, and we're only just getting started with this series. If you have any strong opinions, disagreements with anything I said, further questions, put those down in the comments below. This is an interesting division because you've got a couple of MP candidates with different roster strengths around them, while the other 2 teams are in pretty much the murkiest situations in the league when it comes to that position. Again, I have more detailed scouting reports on like 130 draft prospects and a bunch of other stuff over at Footballtalk.com. You can find that link and my social media outlets in the video description. We're moving east next week, first to the NFC on Tuesday or Wednesday. So until then, see you later. Peace!